Hello, listeners, and welcome to Sevi Sit Down, a place of free-thinking Seventh-day Adventist discussion.
Right now, creationist arguments usually follow the line of evolution doesn't answer all the questions, or evolutionary theory as a philosophy can't replicate the events to create life.
Open ears to people, just be able to listen, right? Because some of the best ways to soak in information is to hear it firsthand from people.
So I did at one point become an atheist. I left the church. I was physically at the church, but I was mentally clocked out of the church during my university years, where I felt like weekly service wasn't really answering questions. It was kind of shallow level repetitive stuff that you would hear week after week. I just felt like church members were kind of brainwashed, and I thought that the term critical thinking Adventist was an oxymoron. Questions that I'll be asking, I'll kind of take the role of the person who might be asking these questions to give a little bit of pushback to some of the answers.
He really had a burden for, having open discussion. He felt like the church often minimized or didn't openly discuss real issues. And I guess that was a big turnoff for him, and it's a turnoff for a lot of youth. And so he had this burden of creating this forum, this place where these issues can be voiced and discussed by actual people in the church, rather than ignoring, rather than hiding and running away from these issues. He wanted to create a place where we could talk openly about these things, and so that was his personal burden, and now he's created a ministry to address that burden because he felt the church hasn't really been doing that.
To think that our young people only need to be entertained and our young people need to have fun is a huge mistake. We need to remember Canada is the #1 country in the world with the highest rate of university education. And we are here in Canada with our young people receiving university education, intellectual knowledge from the world. The question is, what do we do to catch up with that?
If our communities of faith cannot relate to the needs of others, I don't see any kind of future for our communities of faith in terms of growth. So I mean, the whole concept of ministry
And then
is to be.
what ended up happening was
But how can you effectively?
I got to know members of ACF, Adventist Christian Fellowship, and then I was able to encounter other people my age who were asking similar questions to me, but they were in the church, and they had those questions, and then they were trying to find logical, scientific answers that supported their faith. And that kind of like surprised me. I'm like, whoa, look, there are actual Seventh-day Adventists who think critically about things, who don't just believe what they're told, but they think thoroughly, they find evidence to support what they believe. And that's kind of where something clicked in my brain, where it would have been, that kind of helped why I wanted to make a podcast. I want more people to be critical thinking Adventists. I think it's so much more powerful if you are a Christian who believes in something that they can support through logic and through evidence, rather than a Christian who just believes because that's all they know from when they were taught growing up.
That had Black Lives Matter, if you as a customer or even if you as an employee wanted to represent, Black Lives Matter, you wear it under your uniform, or the Starbucks, show what your true intentions are.
I decided to start a podcast because, weekly church attendance is great and everything, and I think that it's important to keep the Sabbath, but there is only so much that you can learn in a weekly service, like in weekly service. There's only so much that can be talked about by the speaker. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a form of dialogue where we could talk about issues that aren't necessarily talked about in weekly service, whether that be evolution, whether that be homosexuality, or like atheism, stuff like that, and kind of try and talk more critically about it and have more of a dialogue sense to it rather than just one person presenting.
When Jed Fritz first thought of the idea and shared it with me about what ideas were coming, I was definitely for it. After he told me like what exactly the purpose is and finally tell me how the plan is going to be executed, I was definitely for it because it shows that he really has that drive and has a vision, and I'm here to support him spiritually as well, praying for him and make sure that everything is going well, because again, this is something we don't see often, especially in the online community, and this is something that sometimes the church doesn't really focus on as much. Now in this generation, well, a lot of people spend time online, and this is one great way to reach them, even if it's just one online person at a time.
Because there's always a bunch of people just like trying to stick around them.
You know, 2019 was known as the golden age, you know, the boom year of intellectual talks on internet, and I don't think that 2020 is much different than that. You know, with platforms like TED Talks and you know, LinkedIn Talks and Google Talks and all of those, millions of young people go online and get intellectual information, get knowledge from all of those professors and, you know, like specialists in their fields. The question is, what do we do as a church? How do we stay relevant to young people who are every day bombarded with a lot of information?
Sometimes the church doesn't have avenues or ministries that allow people to, you know, really express what they're passionate about. And so I think it's important that they start initiatives like this, you know, supporting ministries. If the church can't meet that need, if we don't have a ministry in the church where people can exercise their gifts, yeah, they should totally go out and explore and start something new, like what he has done. Like we have nothing like that here in the church. And so Fritz took it upon himself to start a ministry, and I think it's totally great when people can see a need and have a passion and just get in there and start something. So totally, I think every member should be engaged. If it's not in an official ministry in the church, I think people shouldn't wait for that, and they should just, you know, jump into it.
Everything that I've learned for the podcast, and I don't think I know much, but everything I've learned is just through Googling and through YouTube, and it's 100% self-taught. And yeah, so I don't have any background in sound editing. I don't have any background in any of these things. I studied criminology. I have no media background. So everything that I do for this podcast, I've just learned through my own research. And sometimes I ask people for help, like for example, the intro music. I have no musical background, but I got a friend to do that for me.
It's like the whole wall was broken. It's the wall between me and God. And now when I read the Bible, when I read the Spirit of Prophecy, it's just like it comes alive.
So yes, I do work full-time, 40 plus hours a week. So in terms of the podcast, how much time it takes kind of depends on my week, but I would say during my off days, I work on the podcast, whether that be recording interviews or just editing. So maybe like a 40-minute podcast interview takes me like 4 hours to edit. So I would say I dedicate about 10 hours a week to this. Yeah, but it can vary. Some weeks I work more, I give more time than others. It kind of just depends on the weekend, if someone's available to have an interview or not.
One of the more recent stories that I can recall, it's not about like drugs, but we did this set at a church, and it was like around Christmas time, so it was before like the Christmas service, and
You know, and anyone can start something. Like sometimes we think it's so hard to start up a ministry, but even with limited resources, like with Fritz, for example, he finally just put his foot down and said, you know, I'm going to do this. And he didn't have the most sophisticated gear or the most expensive gadgets and such, but he just went with it, and it's just amazing that it's reaching a wider audience. And to be honest, when he first shared the idea with me, you know, I thought to myself, wow, that's going to be kind of challenging and difficult to do. And I was honestly a bit skeptical at first, but he's really proven me wrong that, you know, if something, you know, has been put on your heart, God has put a burden in your heart, go for it, give it a try. And you just don't know how it's going to flourish and how God is going to use it.
I don't know what the future holds for this ministry, I guess, but I'm just trying to take it step by step. And this kind of goes back to your question about faith. I don't know what the end goal is for this, but I have faith that if I do it and I continue doing it in a way that I hope is serving God, then God will bring it in the direction that He wants to take it. So I don't have any end goals in mind, but I'm just taking it one episode at a time right now.